We've often heard philosophers and thinkers say that you should look to and learn from the past in order to protect the future. In my time studying the past, I learned about Mas Kawaguchi. Born and raised in San Francisco, he was one of the stars of Washington High School's basketball team, championship basketball team. So clearly he and his buddies had some skills. What I remember about him is he would often talk about all the time he would spend after school practicing, because basketball was a big deal for him. Then he'd go home and help his father in his gardening. But this all changed while he was 16 years old, when he was removed from his high school basketball team, barred from coming to high school, and told that he and his family had to stay in close custody in the neighborhood where they lived. The reason for such constraints? Well, Mas didn't commit any crime. The only supposed crime he committed was that he was of Japanese descent. The year was 1942, just weeks after the infamous attack on Pearl Harbor. Those of Japanese descent, even anyone who was 1/16th Japanese, was suddenly seen as a potential enemy of the state. But this is not something that's unique. It's something that we've seen carry forward. But we analyze what happened. What was the result of this? The United States government uprooted an estimated 120,000 people and shipped them off to these remote military-style camps. Mas and his family lived in such an internment camp for 3 long years before finally being released. And this forever remained a stain on our nation's history. When we look at just how prevalent and widespread this was, the question that comes across is, not only is it very shocking to think that our own government would do this to their own body of residents, the majority of whom were citizens, but then to consider and to think how public perception and sentiment turned on those of Japanese descent. How was it that they not only accepted the internments, they allowed it, but they actually went along and agreed with it? So how prevalent was this? When you look at these images, it becomes clear that not only was it the hatred for the Japanese military with whom we were at war, it wasn't just them that we were showing in the media. It was also defamation, mockery, fear, and even hate of those of Japanese heritage. Instead of simply saying to drive carefully, this US Navy poster said that the Japanese celebrate when Americans have a car accident. Instead of simply telling Americans, work hard through this economic difficult time that we're facing, they would say that our Japanese enemies are happy when you take a day off from work. So the Japanese then became the enemy. Even the Japanese here in the United States became the other, separate from us, which then made them not only foreign to the American identity, but also something to be feared and not trusted. Notice how they're depicted. Now, this is not just an isolated case about the Japanese. The same distortion, the same fear, the same mistrust, and even borderline hatred was also spread about African Americans in this country. They too became the other, separated from the rest. Many in America defined what it meant to be American as the polar opposite of the black man. This insistence on portraying them as unclean, low, poor, and uneducated is easy to be seen. Multiple examples of ads, for example, with soap companies, that would conflate being black with being dirty. So buy our soap. Ads from paint manufacturers trying to argue the value of their paint being so strong that perhaps their white paint could even cover the filth of the black skin. Others distorting the image, the facial expressions, to depict them as less refined, less intelligent. And this incredibly unjust and distorted view of African Americans directly connected and correlated with how they were treated. People judge black-skinned Americans not by their personal interactions with them or their experiences or their relationships, but rather by this warped and entirely lopsided narrative about them. So you see, the way we view others and the way we allow others to be depicted in personal or mainstream discourse is something that's not just a matter of words. These words and views lead to mistrust, which lead to fear, which lead some people to this protection mode, to do whatever it takes to protect them from that which we fear. Mass went from being an ordinary American-born high school basketball player to suddenly being a direct threat to the security and safety of the American people due to no act or fault of his own. Of course, this isn't just isolated to the United States alone. This has unfortunately proven to be part of a lower human nature, to lift oneself up by knocking somebody else down. We saw the same phenomena occur in the anti-Semitic messages here in the United States, but obviously a lot more pronounced and prominent in Europe. The Nazis built upon centuries of anti-Semitic stereotypes, depicting Jews as these greedy and gluttonous rats who don't have any conscience and no self-control. Such views culminated in events in Europe where Jews were repeatedly rounded up and either killed or their houses burned down. They were completely banned from England for centuries. They were forced to convert to Christianity or expelled from Spain during the Inquisition. People couldn't stand their presence. So why did this pattern repeat itself over and over again throughout history? Why is it that seemingly good people, good mothers and fathers, good neighbors and teachers would allow and even join this vilification of others? How and why were humans able to not only demonize but persecute an entire population of people? Although this hatred and ill treatment cannot be analyzed and understood in a vacuum, I submit that there is one critical factor that stands out as a key trigger, and that's mystery. You will notice that each and every one of those groups that was victimized were almost entirely and categorically misunderstood by those victimizing them. They're seen as mysterious, different, foreign, not to be trusted. This mystery has proven to lead to some very dangerous consequences, whether it's prejudice, an infraction on civil rights, or even in some cases, unconscionable violence. The simple act of not truly knowing about someone else or about others can be our greatest downfall. When those other mysterious people are then accused of some heinous acts, they're denigrated and belittled and vilified, there's nothing inside us telling us to say, actually, those accusations are not true. We let it happen because we don't know them well enough to say whether or not these accusations are true. And you have no reason to trust them. And this mistrust leads to fear. This fear has driven humans to committing some of the most heinous acts imaginable throughout the course of history. Ask Mass, for he faced more than 1,000 consecutive days of this harsh reality. Ask those who were stolen from their native lands, shipped in crates to the United States, and sold into a life of slavery. They weren't even seen as human. Ask those who are still treated as subhuman, either for being the wrong color, speaking with the wrong accent, believing in the wrong teachings of their faith, or even simply living in a land that somehow was discovered by the so-called civilized. In every case, our ignorance of another people caused us to look at them as less than us. Even in Rwanda, the Hutus depicted the Tutsis as being despicable rodents, which inevitably led to a massacre of the Tutsis, numbering in the hundreds of thousands. Some say even up to 1 million. Behind this hatred for another that leads to these acts is a distance. Distance that is the fertile soil from where fear and mistrust flourish. Now, this couldn't happen now, we'd assume. This couldn't happen now in this day of enlightenment and modern day and age in the United States. I mean, we would never single out another group and try to convince others that they're foreign, not to be trusted, and exotic, right? I wrote the book Demystifying Islam this summer, in part to eliminate this confusion, this mystery, this suspicion that I have felt has been growing about Muslims and Islam for years, to confront these allegations that Islam harbors beliefs that don't even exist in its doctrine, to respond to those who are public figures, who say that all Muslims should be profiled, that to stop and prevent the construction of mosques, or to pass laws that would prevent Muslims from somehow taking over America. It was a detailed analysis of what I consider to be the most controversial topics about Islam that needed to be confronted in order to address and eliminate this ignorance prevalent about Islam, both by non-Muslims and, yes, by many Muslims as well. So what's my goal? My goal in all this is to introduce you to Islam, not to convert you, but in an effort to remove that distance, that confusion, that mystery that keeps us apart from one another. To me, that's the idea. It's time to demystify. It's time to demystify those we are ignorant of, to demystify those that we don't understand, who we've never met. Get to know a Japanese American. Get to know a Hispanic American, an African American, a Jewish American, a Muslim American. Understand what makes them who they are, what drives them, what are their worries, what are their passions. Don't get duped by those with ulterior motives who try to spread rumors and mistrust of others. Dig through and push back against the lies, the rhetoric, the fear-mongering, in order to discover the ultimate truth, that we are all humans, equal. And when you look at Mass, see in him not just a Japanese American, see in him an obedient son, an incredibly hard worker, and just a skilled baller who wants more time on the court. Thank you.